Mud, Sweat and Tears, Chapter 14. We were on a family holiday to Cyprus to visit my aunt and uncle. My uncle Andrew was then the brigadier to all British forces on the island, and as such a senior military figure, I am sure he must have dreaded us coming to town. After a few days holed up in the garrison, my uncle innocently suggested that maybe we would enjoy a trip to the mountains. He already knew the answer that my father and I would give. We were in. The Troodos Mountains are a small range of snowy peaks in the centre of the island, and the soldiers posted to Cyprus use them to ski and train in. There are a couple of ski runs, but the majority of the peaks in the winter are wild and unspoilt. In other words, they are ripe for adventure. Dad and I borrowed 2 sets of army skis and boots from the garrison up in the hills and spent a great afternoon together skiing down the couple of designated runs. But designating runs can also be quite boring. We both looked at each other and suggested a quick, off-piste detour. I was all game, aged 11. It wasn't very far into this between-the-trees, deep powder detour that the weather, dramatically and very suddenly, took a turn for the worse. A mountain mist rolled in, reducing visibility to almost zero. We stopped to try and get, or guess, our directions back to the piste, but our guess was wrong, and very soon we both realised we were lost, or temporarily geographically challenged, as I've learnt to call it. Dad and I made the mistake that so many do in that situation and ploughed on blind in the vain hope that the miraculous would occur. We had no map, no compass, no food, no water, no mobile telephone, they hadn't even been invented yet, and in truth, no likelihood of finding our way. We were perfect candidates for a disaster. Trudging through deep snow when you are young, cold, wet and tired is hard, and the minutes become hours and the hours began to rack up. It was soon dark. We pushed on. Dad was concerned, I could tell. He was a mountain man, but hadn't anticipated that we would be doing anything other than a quick couple of simple ski runs. He hadn't foreseen this. It was a simple mistake, and he acknowledged it. We kept going down. We were soon amongst deep forest and even deeper snow. We then reached a fork in the valley. Should we go left or right? Dad called it left. I had a very powerful intuition that right was the choice we should make. Dad insisted left. I insisted right. It was a 50-50 call, and he relented. Within 200 yards, we stumbled across a snowy track through the woods and followed it excitedly. Within a mile, it came out on a mountain road, and within 10 minutes, we had flagged down a lift from a car heading up the hill in the darkness. We had found salvation, and I was beat. The car dropped us off at the gates of the garrison 30 minutes later. It was by then late into the night, but I was suddenly buzzing with energy and excitement. The fatigue had gone. Dad knew that I had made the right call up there. If we had chosen left, we would still be trudging into the unknown. I felt so proud. In truth, it was probably luck, but I learnt another valuable lesson that night. Listen to the quiet voice inside. Intuition is the noise of the mind. As we tromped back through the barracks, though, we noticed there was an unusual amount of activity for the early hours of a weekday morning. It soon became very clear why. First a sergeant appeared, followed by another soldier, and then we were ushered into the senior officer's block. There was my uncle, standing in uniform, looking both tired and serious. I started to break out into a big smile. So did Dad. Well, I was excited. We had cheated a slow, lingering, hypothermic death, lost together in the mountains. We were alive. Our enthusiasm was countered by the immortal words from my uncle, the brigadier, saying, "I wouldn't smile if I was you," he continued. "The entire Army Mountain Rescue Team is currently out scouring the mountains for you, on foot and in the air, with the search and rescue helicopter. I hope you have a good explanation." We didn't, of course, save that we had been careless and we had got lucky, but that's life sometimes. And the phrase, "I wouldn't smile if I was you," has gone down into Grill's family folklore. Chapter 15. Those were some of the many fun times, but life can't be all fun, and that leads me nicely onto school. As a young boy, I was unashamedly open to the world and hungry for adventure, but I was also very needy for both love and for home. That in itself made me woefully unprepared for what would come next. My parents decided the right and proper thing for a young English boy to do was to be sent away to boarding school. To me, aged 8, that was a mad idea. I mean, I was hardly big enough to tie my own shoelaces. But my parents both felt it was the best thing for me, and so with the best of intentions, they sent me away to live and sleep at a school far from home, and I hated it. As we pulled up at the big school gates, I saw tears rolling down my dad's face. I felt confused as to what part of nature or love thought this was a good idea. My instinct certainly didn't, but what did I know? I was only 8. So I embarked on this mission called boarding school, and how do you prepare for that one? In truth, I found it really hard. There were some great moments, like building dens in the snow in winter, or getting chosen for the tennis team, or earning a naval button. But on the whole, it was a survival exercise in learning to cope. Coping with fear was the big one, the fear of being left and the fear of being bullied, both of which were very real. What I learnt was that I couldn't manage either of those things very well on my own. It wasn't anything to do with school itself. In fact, the headmaster and the teachers were almost invariably kind, well-meaning and good people, but that sadly didn't make surviving it much easier. I was learning very young that if I was to survive this place, then I had to find some coping mechanisms. My way was to behave badly and learn to scrap as a way to avoid bullies wanting to target me. It was also a way to avoid thinking about home. But not thinking about home is hard when all you want to do is be at home. I miss my mum and dad terribly, and on the occasional night where I felt this worst, I remember trying to muffle my tears in my pillow whilst the rest of the dormitory slept. In fact, I was not alone in doing this. Almost everyone cried, but we all learnt to hide it, and those who didn't were the ones who got bullied. As a kid, you can only cry so much before you run out of tears and learn to get tough. I meet lots of folks nowadays who say how great boarding school is as a way of toughening kids up. That feels a bit back to front to me. I was much tougher before school. I had learnt to love the outdoors and to understand the world and how to push myself. When I hit school, suddenly all I felt was fear. Fear forces you to look tough on the outside, but makes you weak on the inside. This was the opposite of all I had ever known as a kid growing up. I had been shown by my dad that it was good to be fun, cosy, homely, but then as tough as boots when needed. At prep school, I was unlearning this lesson and adopting new ways to survive. And aged 8, I didn't always pick them so well. Chapter 16. I remember all of us in our dormitory counting down the days like prisoners until the next exit or weekend at home. Boy, they took a long time to come around, and man, then the glorious weekends would go past so quickly. It was unbridled joy on the day we broke up, seeing my mum and dad arrive first out of all the parents and have dad press his huge nose against our classroom window, pulling a silly face. It was embarrassing but heavenly. Conversely, those Sunday night drives back to school were truly torturous. Give me SAS selection any day, and that was bad, trust me. Dad seemed to find dropping me back at school even worse than I did, which was at least some consolation, but it also just added to my confusion as to why I was being sent away. But what made me most scared wasn't just being away from home, it was the bullying. A few poor and entirely innocent boys just seemed to get picked on by one or two bullies. The bullies would truly make life hell for their hapless victims, not only physically but also emotionally, systematically alienating their victims and teasing them relentlessly and heartlessly. It has made me detest bullying in adult life. If I see it anywhere, I go mad. I was lucky to avoid being on the receiving end of this bullying at that young age, but it meant that I had to learn to cower and keep off the radar, and cowering and hiding are bad emotions for a kid. Like most of the fears we all carry into later life, they are so often based on what could or might happen, rather than what actually did. But bullying and absent parents aside, boarding schools really weren't all that bad, and in truth I was so lucky to get an amazing education in the best ones around. The headmaster and the wife at the school were real gems, and they genuinely cared and looked after every boy as best they could. But a school is a school, and the heart of a school is what happens when the teachers' backs are turned. In the school's favour, I learnt so much more than how to hide from the bullies, and we were genuinely encouraged to be real little people with real interests. We were allowed to make camps in the woods with our buddies, and a blind eye was turned when we sneaked off to build even better secret camps in the out-of-bounds areas. We held do-or-die conker championships, where we soaked our conkers for weeks on end in vinegar to harden them up, and then once a term table tennis competition was treated like Wimbledon itself. Every Saturday night, the whole school would crowd into the hall, perched on the benches to watch a classic old Second World War film on an old, flickery cine reel, and afterwards we each got one chocolate bar as our weekly treat. I would cut this up into segments and ration it for as many days as I could manage. All that was brilliant fun. It was like living in a different century, and I'm certain the school intended it to be like that. It was old school in the best of ways. We skated on the frozen lake in winter, which was tested for strength by the poor Latin teacher on a horizontal ladder, and I was allowed to go cross-country, whatever the weather, which I always loved, and health and safety was kept healthily at bay. Above all, we were taught to look out for each other and to think big, and those are pretty vital life skills, which I am still so grateful for today. By the end of my 5 years at prep school, though, I was also getting pretty naughty, and on one occasion I, with a few buddies, pushed my luck a little far. I was caught red-handed with beer cans in my rugby boots, cigarettes under my pillow, and attempting a break-in entry to the deputy headmaster's house to steal his cigars. The headmaster told us in no uncertain terms that enough is enough. One more slip-up, and you'll all be out. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I was caught French kissing the daughter of another headmaster, whose school we were staying at on our way back from a field trip. The irony is that I wasn't entirely to blame either. 15 of us were sleeping on the floor of a gym in this school we were staying at for a night, and during the evening I had spotted the young teenage daughter of the headmaster licking us all up and down. That night she crept into our dormitory in the dark. Brave girl for venturing into a room full of 13-year-old boys. And she then volunteered to snog one of us. My hand shot up like a rocket, and she came straight over and slapped her mouth over mine. Aged 13, I didn't realise that it was possible to breathe and kiss at the same time, so 30 seconds later I had to break free, gasping frantically for breath. She looked at me like I was some weirdo and then ran out. But she ran straight out and bumped into her father on his headmaster patrol, and of course made up the story that we had lured her into our dormitory and that I had tried to kiss her. It was the final straw. I was politely asked to leave the school along with a few of the other troublemakers who had been alongside me for most of the misadventures. As it was so close to the end of summer term, though, no sooner had we all been expelled than we were all summoned back. Somehow all of our parents had gotten together and agreed that the best punishment would be to send us back to the school after the term had ended and make us spend a week of our summer holiday copying out Latin textbooks. It worked. That was a nail in the coffin for me. I left prep school with the determination that no child of mine would ever be forced to go away against their will, and that I would do all I could to help them grow up without fear. Surely public school couldn't be any worse, I thought. At least there wouldn't be any more randy headmasters' daughters out to snitch on me. Chapter 17. Eton College has the dubious honour of being the most famous school on the planet, and that makes it both a privilege and a pretty daunting place to go. But like most things in life, it is all about what you make of it. In my case, yes, it was scary, but in many ways it was also the making of me. Unlike many public schools, Eton has much more in common with a university than a college. It gives you great freedoms as long as you prove yourself trustworthy of those freedoms. I liked that. I felt empowered and free to explore and pursue those things I was good at. But it wasn't like that at the beginning. Eton has to be one of the most intimidating places to turn up as a nervous 13-year-old. I was excited but terrified. I have since become pretty familiar with such emotions through many expeditions and missions, but at the time, it was new territory. The redeeming factor was that I wasn't the only soul who felt like this when I arrived. I was really fortunate to go into a popular house with fun people, and it made all the difference to my time at Eton. Very quickly, I made a few great friends, and they have remained my closest buddies ever since. But they were friendships formed in the trenches, so to speak, and there is nothing that forms friendship faster than facing off or escaping from bullies together. It is amazing quite how small and insignificant you can feel turning up at Eton as a new boy. The older pupils look like gods and giants. Shaving, masturbating, testosterone-fueled giants. Each house is made up of 50 boys spanning across all years from 13 to 18, and they all live in that house together. Early on, each new boy is summoned individually to the top year's common room called library and made to perform a bizarre series of rituals determined by the older boys and their whims and perversions. One by one we were called in. I was one of the first. This was a good thing. It meant the older pupils had yet to get into full flow. I escaped relatively unharmed, with only having to demonstrate how to French kiss a milk bottle. As I had only ever kissed one person, the prep school headmaster's daughter, some months earlier, and that in itself had been an unmitigated disaster, I wasn't exactly showing this milk bottle much of a virtuoso performance. The older boys soon got bored of me, and I was dismissed, passed and accepted into the house. I soon found my feet, and much less homesick than I was at prep school, thank God. I learnt that with plenty of free time on our hands, and being encouraged to fill the time with interest, I could come up with some great adventures. I and a couple of my best friends started climbing the huge old oak trees around the grounds, finding monkey routes through the branches that allowed us to travel between the trees, high up above the ground. It was brilliant. We had soon built a real-life Robin Hood den, with full-on branch swings, pulleys and balancing bars high up in the treetops. We crossed the Thames on the high girders above a railway bridge, We built rafts out of old polystyrene and even made a boat out of an old bathtub to go down the river in. Sadly, this sank, as the water came in through the overflow hole, which was a fundamental flaw. Note to self, test rafts before committing to big rivers in them. We spied on the beautiful French girls who worked in the kitchens and even made camps on the rooftops overlooking the walkway they used on their way back from work. We would vainly attempt to try and chat them up as they passed. In between many of these antics, we had to work hard academically, as well as dress in ridiculous clothes consisting of long tailcoats and waistcoats. This developed me in the art of making smart clothes look ragged, and ever since I have maintained a lifelong love of wearing good quality clothes in a messy way. It even earned me the nickname of Scug from the deputy headmaster. In Eton slang, this roughly translate as a person of no account and of dirty appearance. Chapter 18. The school regime refused to make it easy for us on the dress side of things, and it dictated that even if we wanted to walk into the neighbouring town of Windsor, we had to wear a blazer and tie. This made us prime targets for many of the locals, who seemed to enjoy an afternoon of beating up the Eton toffs. On one occasion, I was having a pee in the loos of Windsor McDonald's, which was tucked away downstairs at the back of the fast food joint. I was just leaving the gents when the door swung open, and in walked 3 aggressive-looking lads. They looked as if they had struck gold on discovering this weedy, blazer-wearing Eton squirt, and I knew deep down that I was in trouble and alone. Meanwhile, my friends were waiting for me upstairs. Some use they were being. I tried to squeeze past these hoodies, but they threw me back against the wall and laughed. They then proceeded to debate what they were going to do to me. Flush his head down the toilet was an early suggestion. Well, I had had that done to me many times already at Eton, I thought to myself. I was okay so far. Then they suggested defecating in the loo first. Now I was getting worried. Then came the killer blow. Let's shave his pubes. Now, there is no greater embarrassment for a young teenager than being discovered to not have any pubes, and I didn't. That was it. I charged at them, threw one of them against the wall, barged the other aside, squeezed through the door and bolted. They chased after me, but once I reached the main floor of McDonald's, I knew I was safe. I waited with my friends inside until we were sure the thugs had all left, and then cautiously slunk back across the bridge to school. I think we actually waited over 2 hours to be safe. Fear teaches great patience. There are a few other incidents that finally encouraged me to take up karate and aikido, the 2 martial arts they ran at Eton. One of those incidents involved one of the sixth form boys in our house. I won't name him, bully though he was, as he is probably a respectable married man and businessman now, but at the time he was mean, aggressive, and built like a bodybuilder. He had these wild eyes, and after one of his heavy glue-sniffing sessions, he would tend to go insane. His veins would look as if they were going to explode from the muscles in his arms, neck, and forehead, and he had a nasty habit of announcing he was going on the warpath by blasting on a foghorn that he had somehow acquired. For a while, his chosen targets to beat up were both me and my next-door roommate, Ed, and when that foghorn blew, you knew it was time to scaper. Once, I remember hearing it blast, and Ed and I ran into my room frantically looking for a place to hide. We opened the cupboard, crouched inside, and hoped like hell he wouldn't find us. The foghorn got louder and louder, until finally my study door swung open with a bang, and then there was silence. We held our breath as this wild man turned the room upside down, breathing heavily and cursing us under his breath. Finally, there was a pause in the room's destruction. Then we heard his footsteps move towards the cupboard. Another pause. Then the cupboard door was torn open violently, and we were both suddenly staring into the wild, frenzied eyes of our nemesis. We screamed. He grabbed our heads and whacked them together, and after that the rest was a bit of a blur. He threw us around the room for a while and finished with putting us both in half-Nelson arm locks so hard that I was convinced my shoulder would snap. Finally, bored, he kicked us, demonstrating what he said was a ninja jack kick, then left. That was it, I thought to myself. I have to learn how to defend myself properly. Apart from the odd occasion like that and a few bog flashings, and quite regularly being winched up by your boxer shorts and hung off the clothes peg on the back of your door, the days passed busily. The difference between the fear and the bullying at Eton to what we experienced at prep school is that at least I didn't have to face those demons alone. There was generally someone to share those negative experiences with. This time round, it was my buddies and me together, taking flak in the trenches, and somehow I found I thrived on our misadventures.